Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Practitioners, e-commerce practitioners. I'm your host, Vikram Saxena, and today we're joined by someone who has quite literally built and rebuilt digital businesses across industries, from e-commerce giants like eBay to online pharmacies, reshaping healthcare. I've got Joe Tarragano with me, who brings an absolutely rare blend of product strategy, commercial acumen, and hands-on tech expertise as well. From marketplaces, fintech to healthcare, automotive, Joe's journey is a masterclass in how product, customer experience, and commercial outcomes intersect. Buckle up as we explore a lot of lessons learned, bets made, and what Joe sees happening in the future. Welcome, Joe, to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to join. And you make it sound as though I clearly haven't known what I was supposed to be doing in life. I ramble all over the place, which is about right, I think, actually.
Yeah, I think when you end doing a lot of things all over the place, you end up gathering so much broader experience that it makes all the difference in the world, really.
Yeah, maybe. I
Yeah.
certainly hope so. I think it presents an interesting package in some context.
Absolutely. So, Joe, if you don't mind, give us a quick roundup of, how did you move from finance into digital, into product leadership? How did all of that happen? If we start a little bit from the beginning.
Sure, and I think, well, frankly, I think I had a number of very lucky breaks, actually. I found myself in an investment bank, which was a huge surprise. Didn't have a degree at the time,
Mhm.
but was very lucky to get that job. And was also lucky to be part of a quant team. So they taught me maths and numbers, and they also taught me to code because that was necessary to the work they were doing. I enjoyed that, had a lot of fun. I was lucky enough to work with some very bright people, and then went from there into development. Found myself actually as a software engineer for a while, and then a software architect. Enjoyed that very much. Did that for a few years, then found myself off in online publishing, where I have the distinction of almost having convinced my business to launch a kind of AOL.com competitor, and pretty much the same time as this thing called the World Wide Web was in fact actually becoming the norm. Fortunately, they swerved that decision and did the right thing. Um, then I went off and did some more pre-sales type work for a software company, and I found myself running around Europe using my coding skills to build apps for my customers because our core product didn't quite do what it wanted. And so I would call up the US office and say, the product folk, you guys need to sort your product out. It isn't doing what the customer wants. And they therefore said, well, if you're so smart, why don't you come here and fix it then? And that was the start of my career in product a few decades back.
It's quite amazing. Yeah, it seems like you've really seen it right from the seeding stage, the whole digital industry, being there right from its seeding stage.
Yeah, but I was very lucky, and I don't think I knew what I was doing. So I started a startup called social network, and I did that a little before Zuckerberg did, and really his did much better than mine. I don't think I realized what I was doing at the time, and likewise, I found myself at eBay almost by good fortune. Again, not quite clear how that came to be, but yeah, I've been lucky enough to be in the right place often in the right time. And maybe I'm just very opportunistic. Maybe I'm just very out there. I network a lot. I find myself in spaces. I'm very open to things. I don't mind change. In fact, I tend to embrace change and seek it out. I get bored quite easily, actually. So I move around quite a bit. And then maybe that's how it comes to be that I find myself where I now am. And so my current organization, for instance, I think is now one of the fastest growing digital businesses in the UK. The medexpress.co.uk is now, I've learned, top 15 D2C businesses in Europe, but 3 years ago was relatively small. So, sometimes you just find yourself right place, right time, and you can look back with hindsight and claim how brilliant you were, but it's just luck.
Wow, so I think you are one of the very, very few people who've actually given some attribution to the luck or being in the right place at the right time. Majority of the people say exactly what you just said, that how brilliant you were. Majority of everybody that I've come across, they all want to take credit for that. What brings that attitude?
I think I have an ego the same size as everybody else's, frankly, but I'm also quite
Yes.
humble. I'm lucky enough to work with some very, very bright people over the years, and that teaches you that, frankly, you're not the smartest person in the room, even though you might think you are initially. A lot of the time, it is just luck. We happen to be currently in the weight loss business, for instance. That's a market that's going ballistic. We are doing
Yes,
very well, and
absolutely.
in fairness, my colleagues are making all the right decisions, but at the same time, we're just in the right space. So, you just have to be aware of that distinction between what it is that you're doing as opposed to what is the market generally doing. And if you got into digital or e-commerce at the right time, then you would have been successful. That's just how that works. Which also means, by the way, and I'm going to be a little bit rude, maybe contentious, there are an awful lot of people who were successful e-com directors or multi-channel directors or whatever in the kind of 2010 onward type period, who frankly weren't particularly good. They just happened to be the guys that ran
Riding the
online.
wave.
Well, exactly.
They just happen to be riding the wave and being right on place at the right time.
Exactly. I'm probably not going to win friends for saying that, but
Yeah, we'll not go further deeper into that. So, what early lessons shaped your approach to the whole digital business, Jim?
I think mostly it's very easy to do digital things. You know, it's fast, it's simple. You don't have to. For the longest time, I did not do things that involved people and physical change and operational activities. And so just playing with bits and bytes and doing things online, really quick and easy to get stuff done. And I think if you've got that mindset of being fast and experimental and trying things, it becomes easy. And that was, I guess, a core learning for me. As I moved later in life into things that involved trying to organize people or trying to get facilities to do things or to move physical units from A to B, things get a lot harder, frankly, and a lot more complicated. And the opportunities to get it wrong and the ability to course correct are much harder.
And the stakes also get much more harder because it's difficult to change things in the hardware world compared to the software.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so you have to do the good mind shift. And I think good product people, good almost e-commerce people are strong on thinking about risk. How do you de-risk these things? How do you think about doing something that is a smaller test if it involves people, or can you just throw something out there because in fact you can undo it? Understand it, what's involved in the change you're talking about, and how quickly you can roll it back. I think is pretty important.
Absolutely. Now, I think eBay, you started out a very, very interesting time when it was all, really booming through. So what lessons did you found in terms of scaling the marketplace operations at eBay at the time?
Yeah. Well, I joined eBay to help build its automotive capabilities, which was a lot of fun, huge market for eBay. But pretty soon I found myself on the B2B side. It was trying to acquire big name brands like Superdry and Tesco and Next and so on. And I kind of led that from a product and pre-sales, post-sales perspective. And I think my biggest lessons were actually about sales. So, I ran a sales organization for a while and, it just made me realize that sales is basically a process as well. We tend to describe things as certain activities as art or down to people's charms or skills. I think a lot of things can be deconstructed into a flow diagram or into a set of checklists and so on. I like to operationalize things and I love checklists. It just makes my life easier if I know what steps I'm supposed to execute. And if I can turn any activity into that, then that's, that I think makes everyone's job easier because you don't have to think too hard about the boring basic stuff. So that was a big lesson that, sales is basically a process. I think I also learned something about value propositions and about, so eBay had an amazing proposition. We had all the traffic in the world. It was the place to be. But I'd walk into these large organizations and I'd say, you should absolutely be selling on eBay. Look how much of your product is being sold by secondhand or whatever it might be. And I'd do this spiel. And then they would turn around and they go, yeah, but we've got a massive roadmap. We've got 10 people I need to talk to in a committee to get that done. And I realized that the value of your proposition is not what closes the deal. It's the customer's ability to buy at that right time. If they're not ready, if they've got other things on their roadmap, if they've got a lack of champions for your particular thing, then how good your idea is. It does not fly off the shelves. So if you build it, they will not come. And I was very surprised by that. I thought I'd tell them the eBay story and they would be falling over themselves to come live.
Yeah.
Turned out not to be the case.
Wow, that's an amazing lesson, Joe, because I completely agree with that, irrespective of how tempting your offer or proposition might be. But if it does not fit in their timeline and you've not got a champion, it's not going to go. I've not heard anybody say that really. Not many people say that. Everywhere, everybody you speak to, they just talk about refine your proposition. If customers are not choosing you, then it's the proposition.
Yeah, and I don't think that's true. I think the customer has to be ready to buy, whether it B2B or B2C. Obviously, talking about B2B in that case, but it's definitely about their readiness as much as it is about the quality and the value of your proposition, I think. And maybe one of my other observations is, knowing your own organization and what matters and what makes you successful. So at eBay, one of the earliest clients I did business with was a business called Littlewoods. It tends to serve a less affluent demographic. The people I was working with at eBay, being consultants and terribly bright young things,
Yeah, of course.
no one was interested in that proposition. So when I came back and said, we
Yeah.
sold these guys, they just didn't care. If, on the other hand, we signed up Abercrombie and Fitch or somebody like that, despite being a tenth of the size, they would be the customer that my colleagues would be really interested in. So knowing how your colleagues in your business values things is also quite important.
That's a very interesting example and scenario that you brought out. So if you were to build a marketplace today, what would you do different? What would you do to have much bigger impact if you were to build it today?
Yeah, well, I think actually, in fairness, it's pretty easy to build a marketplace these days. The process is well understood. There's some great books written on this. There's enough of these marketplaces out there. Everybody gets the dynamics now of how you solve for both demand side and supply side.
Last idea.
I think there's also some really nice off-the-shelf tools. I won't name names, but there's plenty of people in this space who can give you something that can get you up and running.
Yep.
So I think it's pretty easy. The hard part is that getting the flywheel turning, so making sure that you are correctly focusing on either the buy side or the supply side, or both, depending on where you are in the mix. And I think and it's been well written about as to how you seed these things and how you kickstart them, often by using a lot of manual activity or kind of mechanical type ways of hacking the system. In my case, the first marketplace I launched, which was well before eBay, was effectively a yellow pages. And so when customers would contact me for trying to find a window cleaner or trying to find a babysitter or whatever, I'd have all these lengthy listings on my site, but the reality is I would then pick up the phone and I'd call around and I'd try and matchmake that thing for them.
Wow.
So that, and I think that's how a lot of early stage businesses start, right?
Yes, of course.
Cheat, basically.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. No, I'm sure, like you said, with the marketplaces, there's a very unique challenge that it's not just the supply side, the demand side. You have to get both the motions, both the wheels side of the wheels, get moving to make any of them work. So suppliers will come only if the buyers are there. Buyers will come only if the supplier is there.
Yeah.
So what is the best approach? Of course, there's a lot of theory written on it. There are a lot of lessons learned around it. But it would be good to get your view on it. Practical.
Yeah, my view's probably pretty simplistic, and I try and simplify most things. And I think, as you say, the sellers will always show up if there's somebody to sell to. So that's just an economic argument.
Absolutely.
They don't have to be convinced. Whereas buyers have an emotional element to it. They have an array of needs which are more complex and more sophisticated. So getting someone to come to your site and want to engage with you and to accept your trust cues and to be part of your experience is much harder. So I would tend to emphasize that side. If I've got customers who are typing in, have you got a black dress? Then all I need to do is find someone who sells black dresses and say, 10 people have searched for it. You've got some. Would you like to sell to them? Now, to my earlier point around trying to get large companies to get onto the eBay platform, that turned out to be harder than I thought. But I would tend to optimize in general on the buy side because I think they are more complicated. My sellers show up with money on offer.
Yeah. Buyers typically will have so many different incentives or motivations behind any purchase and the reasons behind purchase, including impulsive, which is almost impossible to predict.
Yeah, it's a more complicated side of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I think after the eBay, you started some ventures on your own as well. One of them was AutoFixer and Ask My Network.
Yeah. So Ask My Network was this social network plus Yellow Pages I built.
When was that?
That was in 2000, actually. So I was early into that.
Wow.
And got a lot of things wrong on that one, actually. My only defense is that it was well before the Lean Startup came out. And if I'd read that book, if it'd been written 10 years earlier or 15 years earlier, whatever it was, I'd have loved it because I made all of those classic mistakes, like thinking I knew the customer, spending too much time building a great experience rather than getting it out there and seeing what worked. Made a lot of mistakes, I think. You live and learn from those things. And then I decided
Of
to,
course, of course.
I gave it a go again after eBay. Later on, I started AutoFixer, which was more an automotive parts startup. And having come out of run the eBay automotive category for a while, I understood that business very
Yeah.
well. I knew a lot of the players in that space. And as with my first startup, I thought I understood where the opportunity was and what the customer needed. And so it made logical sense for me to just give it a go myself.
Yes.
I'd encourage anyone who's at that time of life where they can afford to just give it a go and they think they've got an idea that makes sense, to do that. It's enormously fun. It's energizing. You learn tons. You may not make any money. It may not be a particularly brilliant idea, but there's a lot to be said for doing things on your own or ideally in partnership with some other people. And that was
Yeah.
actually one of my biggest mistakes is that I failed to build a team. I instead did too much of it myself, which is never a good idea, I would suggest. And certainly not in my case, because I need other people to be honest and to challenge me and to fill all the many gaps that I have.
Yeah, and of course, I think that is always challenging. Now, in terms of how long did you run Ask My Net?
I think it was about 3 years, maybe 2, 3, something like that. Not very long.
Not
Long
really.
enough to lose enough money on it and then to need to go get a proper job again. And AutoFixer probably somewhat likewise, though that at least was less than that one.
Okay. So then you decided to go back to your corporate job.
Yeah. Well, I was lucky enough to be called by someone I knew who's ex eBay actually, and that was a really nice opportunity for me because I then walked into a much larger organisation, so GSK, global multi-billion pound
Yes.
operation, to help them with their e-commerce ambitions and with their digital ambitions, and that was it was supremely interesting for me. I have tended to move in search of things that will challenge me, where I don't really know what I'm doing. I've got some reasonable idea, but I'm kind of figuring stuff out as I go along. But hopefully, I'm a little bit ahead of some of the people who are in the room or some of my colleagues.
Wow.
Um, and actually, I've done quite a lot of consulting as well, and that tends to help because you accumulate diverse experiences and diverse knowledge, and so you can bring different things to bear. And that's been quite helpful in my career. And so at GSK, I spent some time helping them figure out what they were doing in the kind of digital space, which I enjoyed,
What?
but it was very difficult, very different for me, rather, I should say.
Yeah, so GSK, I believe, would not be doing a B2C or a D2C kind of a e-commerce initiative, but would that be a B2B e-commerce?
Yeah, well, actually, they had a D2C piece as well, which I was loosely
Okay.
connected to, but not very big. But it was mostly about the B2B side. It was like, how do we get product into the hands of the retailers, the pharmacists, the distributors, the wholesalers around the world, and how do we run that sales? So how do we enable the sales force? A large portion of it was Salesforce enablement and using a lot of off-the-shelf software. Actually, it was my first significant exposure to very large enterprise software deals. And traditionally, I
Mm-hmm.
built a lot of software
Yeah.
rather than buying it off the shelf and then customizing it. But yeah, to enable the 10,000 odd salespeople around the world to be successful.
Now, how did that happen? How did you manage? What were some important lessons you learned on the way? Because most of the times, the biggest problem in the corporate is not essentially technology, but the adoption of technology. Of course, selection and implementation has got its own set of challenges. But then the adoption, which makes it successful or a failure, is even more critical. So, what were the things that you did to make it right?
Yeah, good question. And I think it's about finding small exemplars. It's about can you do something that builds your brand, but also the brand of the initiative that you are trying to land. So, how can you
Hmm.
find a small win somewhere that evidences why this has value? Then you can create your internal champions who help spread that message for you. And I think if you can light those little fires and watch them then spring up and turn into something much larger, that can be successful. Certainly, that was the case in some of those environments from GSK, and actually a little later in some of the work I was doing. I think it also helps to be very pragmatic and acceptant of how the business itself works. So
Yeah.
I've seen people come in, particularly if they are digital experts into non-digital businesses or businesses trying to transform, and be hugely evangelical, but the business is just not ready for it. They may say they're ready.
Yes.
Very
Yes.
few businesses would say, it's a bit like AI today. Everyone would say, yes, I want to be an AI business. I want to be a
Yeah.
data. But are they really? What's their real incentive to change? Do they
Yeah.
really care? Will their stock options be worth more money if they do that or not? These sort of
Yeah.
agency issues definitely matter. So you have to meet the organization where it's at
Yeah.
and understand what its level of readiness is, what language they want you to talk to them in, and find these little ways that you can prove it can be done. I'm sure some people have been successful coming in and just being hugely evangelical and setting the business on fire, etc. But I've not been in that sort of situation, and I've not found that to be hugely productive.
So you think getting quick wins is very critical to get people excited about the new initiative, and that's to drive the change because the adoption and rollout of projects is a nightmare in majority. I mean, I worked in a large distributor, global distributor of hardware and software, and we used to build a lot of systems. But getting people to use it, training, education was a project in itself. I mean, it was spanned across a few years, get about months or weeks.
Yeah, and it sort of goes back to what we're saying about, your value proposition or your idea can be brilliant. The solution might be the most efficient, wonderful thing in the world.
Yes.
But it's about people and whatever is on their mind and their agendas and their requirements, and can you get them to change? And that's just a very different set of challenges, and it's never a rational conversation. If you just simply set out the pros and cons, everyone would buy your thing, right? If you had a better mousetrap, they would buy it.
Yes.
If you told them why it was a good piece of software, they would use it. But that's not how the world works.
Yeah. Well, that's a very refreshing take on all of these elements. Most of the time, people always say the most cliched thing, but it's refreshing to get your viewpoint on all of this, really.
Well, I think I would argue, if you talk to Johnny Ive or someone at that kind of level of brilliance, they would argue that yes, you build something amazing, and then people will, in fact, just drop what they're doing and they would jump to your thing. And that's probably true, right? If you are an Apple or something like that. But I think for many of us, where you're trying to do something which is just a bit kind of incrementally better, then in which case the barrier to change is pretty substantial for most people.
Absolutely. I think today Apple is also pretty much in that category. It's not people don't just drop it. I mean, the days of people just dropping everything and standing in the queues for a new iPhone, I think it gone by.
I would tend to agree. I still have huge respect for those folks, and I wouldn't dream of criticizing them. But I think, as you say, it's all a bit old news now. What's the next thing?
Exactly. Now, everybody talks about customer first, customer first. What's your take? What are the common mistakes that companies make when they talk about customer first?
Yeah, well, maybe the most obvious one is that they talk about customer first, but it isn't in their DNA. Now, at the same time, I don't think I've ever met a CEO or anyone like them who would not say they're customer first, right? You have to just customer second. That's just not going to happen. The reality is that then, if that is true, why are the primary metrics that they are tracking profitability or volume or efficiency or whatever? Why are they not empowering their frontline workers to take action to support whichever customers just walk through the door? So people say these things, whether they then encode it in their operating model and in their KPIs and their North Star and all the things that actually define how they work is quite different. So that would be my kind of maybe first observation. The second thing I would say is be very, very clear on who your customer is, right? People often aren't laser focused. And I think that's what startups do very well, or ones that grow properly have that whole concept of an ideal customer profile, and you get your product market fit, and then you grow out from there, from your bullseye from there. But I think particularly large companies sometimes lose their way and they forget who is their customer, what is the thing that they really stand for. You start chasing growth at all costs. And then one of the things that leads to is you start to think you know your customer. And I was very privileged at eBay. Well, there's so many wonderful things from eBay, but one of the things they did was, I'd have meetings in my diary, whether I liked it or not, where I had to talk to a customer. So you couldn't help but be connected. And, we'd start weekly team meetings with customer anecdotes and videos and all the things that maybe that's pretty obvious now, but at the time I was delighted by it. But I've been in places where the CEO in particular has forgotten that the customer they once knew, maybe it's a large enterprise customer, now they're chasing SMEs or they're chasing the consumer market, and they don't know that customer. They've not met one. The data points are no longer accurate, and they've not been out walking the streets, working in the store, or whatever it is that you need to do. And that would be my other key observations, people, is you can't get away from staying connected to your customer, whatever level you're at. Go and work in the store, or go and man the phones, or do whatever it is that you're getting. Go and deliver parcels, or if you work at Every, do whatever it is you need to do to stay connected to that customer and remember who he or she actually is. Because you can forget, or you can find, or you're chasing a different segment and it's no longer the same customer. And I think senior execs are particularly bad at assuming that because they used to know the customer in one segment, it translates automatically into all the other new markets they're going after.
Absolutely.
And I'll bring that to life in my current organization. We are very successful, extremely successful in the UK, and we're in the US, and we will shortly be launching into some European markets. Candidly, I'm a little petrified because I just don't know enough about some of those European customers, and I can't speak to them in their native language, so I'm relying on intermediaries to tell me what they care about. And that's hard. That's a dangerous place to be because you can get things wrong.
Absolutely. My favorite thing that you said was everybody says customer first, but why are the metrics not reflecting that? Why is the metrics profitability and not customer NPS or potentially any other metric that would measure the customer first initiatives or the delivery to the customer? I think that's absolutely brilliant. So I think one theme that I came across a lot, you believe that a lot of companies say a lot of things which are good on the face of it, but typically they mean something else. The meaning of that, the interpretation of that, and the execution of that is completely different because it's not just driven by that. Why do you think there's such a difference in the what companies tend to say and what they actually practice or preach?
Yeah, I didn't realize, but you're right. I'm coming across as a little bit cynical about organization.
I'm thoroughly enjoying it because most of the times people say politically right things, and you're the first one who's saying the correct things, which may or may not be politically right. But I enjoy this kind of conversation most.
Maybe that's why I keep changing industry because I keep getting hounded out of the industry. I don't do that. No, it's a good question. I think sometimes it's actually just quite hard to stay grounded, particularly the more senior you get, because it's hard to challenge seniority. People aren't likely to, to your point. If someone says they're customer first, it's quite difficult for someone to say, well, where's your evidence for that? So you can
Yeah.
find yourself in a bubble, and then it becomes quite difficult to stay connected and to actually find the time or to create the processes. It sounds easy to be customer first, but it really isn't. It's a
Yes.
difficult place to be. And it's a challenging place to be, and not least because your customer is often awkward, or you may want to delight them, you may be focused on NPS, but frankly, your shareholders or your immediate cash situation
Yeah.
requires you to just do some different things.
Yeah.
Those are the harsh realities. It's very easy to say, "Oh, I'll be customer first," but actually, when that gets tested against your bank balance or against this week's sales numbers, it can be a very difficult place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes so much sense. And now you've been in healthcare, e-commerce, fintech. What's the common thread or common lesson for building great digital products from your experience?
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit industry agnostic. The blueprints are largely the same, right? It is understand your customer, figure out what are your unique reasons to win against that. What are your competences that line up against their pain points, and then bridge the two. And then how you execute on that is the interesting and difficult bits.
Yeah.
But I think I don't think digital businesses, e-commerce businesses is all that complicated anymore. There was a time 20 years ago when people were figuring things out from first principles. When you asked about
Yes.
marketplaces, you could probably talk to hundreds of people who've been there and done it. But I think now you can just read this stuff. It's now about not being brilliant, but about brilliant basics. It's about execution. It's about
Yeah.
just doing the things and doing them well. So I think most organizations could define what the to be vision is for their business. And then the question is, can you get there from the as is? And bridging that gap, whichever industry you're in, is an execution challenge, I think. Yeah, maybe I'm
Execution is the
underrating.
key.
Well, I think so. Maybe I'm underrating those people who kind of like to pretend how brilliant they are when it comes to digital. And there are some brilliant ones. I shouldn't really say that because I know, again, a lot of my former eBay colleagues are terribly clever and brilliantly successful and done amazing things. But I think a lot of it is now pretty well understood. You can buy a book on it. You can ask ChatGPT and it'll tell you the formula for how to build a
Correct.
digital business. It's execution.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It'll probably even tell you what code to write. Maybe it'll
Yeah.
give you the code as well.
Yes, exactly. That is definitely the case these days.
Yes, yes. Let's see where the whole programmer community goes in next few years. It's interesting how things are evolving. Now, how important it is, for product leaders or people who are managing the projects or products to have real tech fluency. I mean, you've been a coder in the initial stages and you've moved on to various different roles which were not really technical per se. So how critical do you think it is to have technical fluency when you're managing a team of in driving these products and projects?
Yep. Yeah. So I think, as you say, I did have, and to some extent still have, reasonably good technical skills. But I've also done sales, I've done ops, I've done marketing, I've been a GM and a CEO. So I think in all those domains, it's about the ability to stress test the thing that you're talking about. It's about asking some reasonably good questions. Now, I when I was much younger and was in product, I thought my job was to basically tell the developer, no, I could do that twice as fast. You're just lying. I'm sure it's you. Just why are you sandbagging? It should be much quicker than that. God, let me do the code for you. I thought that was the value of my technical expertise. You can tell I was not fun to work with. But I think, now it means that I can just ask people some useful questions that, tell me why that is. And I can challenge them on some things just to invite them to unpack their thinking a little bit more so that I get comfort, they get comfort, and maybe we find a different way of doing something. And I think, again, being slightly more senior, the technical fluency I have means that I can think more about the constraints that they're putting in and the architectural decisions. So I can ask them more about, well, okay, what does it mean to do it that way in terms of if I wanted to then add, or if I wanted to add 3 more markets, or if I wanted to talk to my customer more regularly or cross-sell to him or her. You can ask the slightly more strategic questions where you feel that there's going to be a constraint on what they're designing. Because they're probably, someone said to them, go make it blue. And you can say, great,
Yes.
make it blue. But what if I wanted different shades of blue? Because they're not thinking about that. Whereas hopefully as a more senior leader, you're looking up at them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So on a side note, how did people react when you said I could code it twice as fast as you would if you actually did that?
I mean, it's just so unhelpful, isn't it? It's, it may or may not have been true, but highly unstable, deeply disempowered is just not a good way of doing things. But again, when I was younger, I think I felt that my value was in my speed, my skills, my ability to work exceptionally hard. I worked a lot of hours in various places. Those things are not really valuable. Attributes of
Yeah.
youth, that is. Um, and there's always someone, frankly, who can work harder or always do better than you or is faster than you or whatever it is. So those are not things to cultivate. But they get you to a certain point in your career and they can be quite useful. But I believe that the path to success is to work through people. And that means
Yes.
lining them up on the right initiatives, making clear that they know what they're doing, and then supporting them and unlocking them. That's much more scalable, much more effective than me trying to be the best person in the room.
Yeah, no, that makes so perfect sense. And I think I've got certain angle of certain element of that problem with me as well, which I am trying to address at my end as well. Because being a hardcore techie, I sometimes do tend to get into that zone and try to then pull myself back. No, don't do that. Don't do that. You just have to. It's almost like when you're learning driving, you have to tell yourself, okay, now you have to move to the second gear. And then
Yeah,
gradually it becomes natural. So, yeah,
yeah.
that's why
Well,
that
yeah,
just
well,
piqued
it's a
my
bit of
interest.
digression. Having children, and I had my daughter pretty early. Actually, extremely useful because you realise all the bad habits. You realise you can't just bludgeon people into submission.
Yes.
Telling a little child over and over again to do it this way does not help.
No, no, it doesn't. Absolutely not. Completely agree with you. Now, with all of this AI thing, of course, there is no conversation that happens without the topic of AI. Where do you see this happening, and where do you see, how do you see this whole AI thing evolving?
Yeah, and I think it's all about speed between thought and outcome and the measurability of that outcome. And I think
Yes.
what a lot about AI, we were doing some prototyping this week, conference we had, using tools like Lovable, if you're familiar with them, and Replit and things like that.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and you basically have an idea at 2 o'clock. By 2:30, you've knocked up some pretty good prototype, and then you can use Listener or various other things or any number of tools to have 100 users interact with that by 3 o'clock. And then figure out, therefore, have I got a business? Have I built something reasonable? Is this a thing or not? And that AI's ability to get you from idea or poorly written sentence to something that's massively better and that's well
Yes.
validated, or a full scale essay, is the bit that I'm so impressed by. I think its ability to enhance your speed to the outcome and speed to then checking whether that's the right outcome is going to be transformative. But I think it's a journey that I've seen from the old tech to the new tech. Every 10 years, whatever it is, the cycle just gets faster, gets easier, more people can do it, and may that continue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And where do you see this? Do you have any prediction for, let's say, where would all this be next 5 years? Can you visualize that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have the imagination for it, to be honest. I think it's going to be so different. Things are going to become so easy, so fast, so powerful. Our ability to invent new things and new ways of working. I don't know what that's going to look like. But what I would say um, is there'll be a whole bunch of industries, a whole bunch of businesses, a bunch of people who are still doing things as though they were using steam engines, frankly. I mean, we're having a conversation about e-commerce and marketplaces as though everybody now knows how to do digital and sell online. That's just so not true, right? There are plenty of businesses making good money, having the faintest idea how to enable their sales through tech or to sell D2C or anything else. And it will be the same for AI. There'll be some people who are amazing, and then there'll be probably a very substantial late majority or a bunch of laggards who are making good money, or doing okay, who are not dying. Blockbusters, I think, still has a store. I think I might be wrong on that one, but some of these things take a long time to die out. And I'm kind of hoping I'm in that grade, because I suspect I won't be able to keep up with the people who are winning.
Yeah, the way things are changing and at the pace that it's changing, it's just absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you were to give somebody an advice in terms of starting their digital career today, what would that be?
Yeah, I think it's got to be learn how to learn. I think we don't know what's coming. We never know what's coming, really.
Yes.
Well, depending on what you do for a living and so on. But for the most part, maybe that's why I've enjoyed my career. I go into things where I don't really know much about it, and I try and figure it out, and I try and learn, and I ask lots of questions, and I assume very little. And I think that's important, that you have to learn all the time and be very good at learning and learn fast. And of course, the tools that we're talking about will help you with that journey. And networks and people and friends and building connections will also help you with that journey. And I think that would be the key skill, because that's what you're going to need. Domain expertise, I think, will become devalued. I think you can pick that up from anywhere. What you need to be able to do is to adapt, learn faster, be able to bring things together and synthesize things, some of those human skills. And maybe related to that then is more emphasis around one's EQ rather than IQ. Learn how to work with people, through people, alongside people, to be successful, understand what people are saying and doing. Probably the stuff that's most valuable, I would think. The harder domain things and the practicalities, and we talked earlier on about working hard or working fast, all of that stuff I think is going to become too easy and too simple. Unlikely to be a competitive advantage, I would think.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think working hard will become hardly working.
Yeah. Lovely way of phrasing it. Nice.
Yeah, I think that's what is going to happen, because the way things have evolved, it's just everything is out there on your tips, basically. I mean, I have started using AI on my way in the cabs onto the airports. And I think of an idea and then I literally beat it down to the level of components and codes that I want to build around it. And it gives me an end-to-end solution, a complete journey, including a mock-up, a visual, with everything, all the screens in there. So by the time I reach the airport or from the airport to the home, I've got a basic solution design done within about a span of about 45 minutes to 1 hour. You just have to find clarity in there. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's been absolutely fantastic, Joe, so far. Now, before we go ahead, before we leave this amazing conversation, I'm just going to shoot a few, two, three rapid fire questions, if whatever comes to your mind. A book that you'd recommend for anybody and everybody to read in today's day and age.
Okay, a book. I tend to do more podcasts than books, if I'm honest, these days.
Okay, what podcast?
So Azim Azar does something called The Exponential View. Actually, I was lucky enough to work with Azim way back when at Reuters in innovation. And I'd recommend that because he brings together very clever people in the economics, politics, and technology type spaces. And he gives you a view of where's the future going. And I always like to listen to smart people say smart things.
Absolutely perfect. Sorry, what was the name of the podcast?
Azim Azar's Exponential View.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Biggest myth in your perspective in product management?
Probably the fact that it's new, actually. People keep acting as though product management is some new cool thing. I think there are people... It's different now, for sure. I mean, and it becomes more different with AI, and it's different in digital than it was in physical. But, there are people that P&G
Yes.
and Unilever, who are called product managers, who thought about how do you understand the customer and commercialize a product and deliver it for them decades ago. This isn't a new thing. It's just the tools and the techniques have changed, I think. Maybe that's the myth. It's not some special new thing. Equally, therefore, it's maybe one of those things that people should start to learn how to do, would be a strong recommendation. There's a lot of organizations that don't know how to do it. Maybe that's the myth, but it's easy. I don't think it's
Everybody tends to use the words of product management, but nobody tends to follow it anywhere. Really, the execution again is that comes out as the key, and something that you still love doing hands-on.
so I know I like coding, but I don't do very much of it. I tell you probably what I definitely is my sort of secret advice is I love playing with pivot tables and getting into Excel and looking at the data. I'm a bit of a data junkie. That's the thing that's probably the thing I do that I shouldn't do. I really should outsource that to somebody or something. But talking to customers is always the best thing to do, actually. That's hugely energizing, but I'm allowed to do that. Whereas playing with data, probably I should leave that to somebody else.
Yeah, interesting. So you still love your pivot tables in Excel.
Yeah. I think Excel is possibly one of the best products ever invented, even though it gets used for so many things beyond just adding up numbers.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, I think one last thing is what advice would you give to the entrepreneurs that are stepping into the world today and starting new businesses?
Well, I've said already, learn's good. Network, that would be important too. Be humble. Yeah, recognize your gaps and that you're going to need other people and that there's lots to learn. And actually, maybe on that one then, yeah, I've been so lucky. Surround yourself with people who are better than you are. That is the path to growth, is to work with or for people who are just much smarter, much more capable than you are, and then you'll accelerate your development.
Fantastic. I think on that note, Joe, I think it's been absolutely phenomenal and enlightening to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate you taking time out and doing this with me. It's been absolutely a pleasure doing this conversation. Any closing notes you would like to say, Joe?
No, other than to thank you. I think I really appreciate you asking me. Thank you. I've still no idea why you asked me, but hopefully it's useful. And delighted to take part. So I think anything that helps anyone figure some stuff out or gives them a path that might be useful, I think is good to share. So I appreciate you creating these kinds of content for other people. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, if I can help in any way, I'd be delighted. So just by all means, just drop me a note on LinkedIn or whatever.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you so much, guys, for listening into this, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much.